In this video, I'm talking with Logan, the CEO of Graze Robotics. We are discussing everything state of the industry. We talk about what's currently working, what's not, what business models work, which business models don't. Is anyone actually making any money? Is anyone actually having any success in robotics? We talk about insurance, we talk about maintenance. We talk about everything state of the industry. This is part one of a 2-hour interview with Logan, and I'd argue he is probably one of the very best people to listen to because he is very well connected in robotics and he knows exactly what is happening. Enjoy. What's up, Logan? Good to see you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I'm guessing a bunch of the people watching probably don't know who you are. So tell me a little. I know a lot of what you've done and it's a lot. Tell me a little bit about your past.
Yeah, so I've spent going on 10 years in the green industry. I started a chain of lawn and garden stores in Ohio called Landmark Lawn and Garden. Really my first forte into the distribution wholesale side of the lawn and garden space. Most of our customers were landscaping companies, fertilization companies, pest controls companies, so very similar to kind of a Site One. Mm-hmm. And we bought that, did a turnaround on it, ultimately sold it off to private equity. And in the midst of running that business, we had the chance to work with a lot of landscapers who are really struggling with labor, as you know. I had owned a landscaping company prior to that, so I'd seen some of that, but in 2012 it was nowhere where it was in 2016, 2017 when we took over Landmark. And as we started going down that path, we started seeing more and more landscapers interested in automation, that this is going to be the future. And I grew up with the MTD family, which is now Stanley Black & Decker. They had a product called RoboMow, and we started testing RoboMow's product. And long story short is, in testing that RoboMow product, we thought there's something here, but there happened to be this company called Robin Autopilot here in Dallas who had already been working with RoboMow to deploy these units under a robot as a service model. And so Robin had franchised this RAS model, focused on getting a sole entrepreneur to open up a new franchise and then offer these robots as a full service line to residential customers.
Was that back in the day when they did Shark Tank?
Right, yeah. They were on Shark Tank in 2018.
Okay.
I acquired the company in 2019 and really dismantled the franchise business. And we can talk about franchising later. But the core problem was the adoption of the end consumer. They had some early adoption. Ultimately, there wasn't enough adoption to make it its own business. And so we converted that company into a pure SaaS play. So we did fleet management software, activity tracking pucks for monitoring activity on vehicles, on handheld equipment, push mowers, so forth, and partnered heavily with Husqvarna Group. And post that, I've had an opportunity to come over to Graze Robotics, focused on really our go-to-market strategy. I took over as CEO just over a year ago now. Graze is a developer of fully autonomous commercial mowers, mostly solar fields, airports, municipality work, kind of large-scale equipment, 100 acres and beyond per week. But I've stayed very active in the space. I've worked with landscapers, worked with enterprise users, and really like the service-based space, and I'm looking forward to really starting to scale it up.
Great. So, because you're the expert, tell us a little bit about what would you say the state of the industry right now looks like? And we've got commercial and we've got residential, but just in terms of robotics as a whole, what's it look like? And as you're answering that, kind of weave in, I remember speaking, I've spoke on stage multiple times and talked about robotics going way back, and I've heard myself say over the years, I think about 5 more years, in about 5 years we'll be there. And that was more than 5 years ago, and I feel like every time I talk about it, it's still another 5 years till it's getting exciting. A lot's changed, but kind of tell us where we're at these days, what's happening.
So I'll preface it by saying the green industry, the lawn and garden industry, is typically a couple decades behind, manufacturing and medical and IT and so forth. And so when I came into it, I thought the same thing. We're at the cusp of it. And the original Robin founders, going on a decade now, thought that they were at the point where the market was going to flip. And it was always this idea that once you got enough density in one neighborhood, one city, that everything flips. The reality is that's not the case.
Is this a consumer challenge or is this a capital challenge? Like, for example, I remember a lot of companies would say, or people would say, well, I think robotics in the green industry or lawn care is going to be here with the next number of years because look at what's happening with Tesla. But Tesla had way more money. So is this a capital problem or is this a client adoption problem?
So there's twofold. The first part is adoption by consumers. So, Tesla had an advantage in money and so forth, but also the cars worked. Yeah. And 99% of people can pull out of their driveway in a Tesla and get to where they need to go. Yeah. More like 40% of consumers can put a robotic lawnmower down and it be successful. Yeah. And so you have such high turnover. Robots today work, and I'll talk about some of the different areas where they work really well and where they work really poorly. The challenge is that they're a fit for a small percent of overall properties. Yeah. And in the commercial space, it's a little bit easier because you have much more repetition from property to property. Every soccer field's the same. Parks and Rec is very similar. And so you can utilize robots because they're constantly learning that and getting better. Consumer properties are different from property to property. There's more obstacles, there's soccer nets, there's fences, there's all these different things. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, consumers in particular want things to be stupid easy. If it creates any challenge, I mean, you know this, you've had a robotic lawnmower for a couple of years.
5 years almost.
Yeah, and if it's not managed by someone else, it's a pain in the ass. Yeah. I mean, it is a difficult value task when you want it. And Roomba, everyone compared it to Roomba, right? And people were used to going and getting their Roomba unstuck, and they got used to this. It's very different going and getting your vacuum unstuck inside the house than going in your backyard, digging it out of mud, right, and fixing a wire break. Like, two different worlds.
Yeah. Well, you also made me think of something as you were talking. The old Tesla analogy actually has never been a good one now that I think about it, because in the Tesla world, if the comparison should actually be Tesla autopilot to a robotic mower, right? Because it's got to be autonomous.
Yep.
And Tesla wouldn't have ever made it had we been waiting for their autonomous technology. That was promised a long, long time ago.
The car had to work.
Yeah.
And even today, the autopilot on Tesla is good in some cases and bad in others.
But you can't, and that's the difference in robotics. We need it to be 100%.
Right.
And there's we don't want a human to have to intervene. We don't want Miss Smith to go out there, or Bob that works at ABC Corporation have to go outside and deal with the mower. So that makes a lot of sense.
You asked about the overall market. Yeah. So the market has expanded drastically over the last decade. So if you look at robotic lawnmowers in mostly residential, but also in commercial, they all came out of Europe. Mm-hmm. So Husqvarna has always been your global leader. It's who Robin worked with over the last 6 years. You have Stihl, you have Echo, you have Honda, you have Toro, John Deere. I mean, you have tons. That market is gaining some legs. So the incumbents, your Husqvarna's, Positech, which has a commercial brand called Crest now, they're all starting to get some significant numbers in adoption, but they've started to really figure out where they can hone in on a particular market. Keep in mind, they've been in the U.S. coming on a decade. Mm-hmm. They've been in Europe over 20 years. Europe is, saturated with robotic lawnmowers. The U.S. hasn't even captured 1%.
Yeah.
The other part of the market is you have a lot of newcomers. So you have a ton of startups, especially on the residential side. There's probably 10 new companies that have come to market. More than 70% are coming out of China. So you have Europe, you have China, and then you have a couple U.S. brands. That's all consumer. On the commercial side, it's almost all startups. So you have, our company Graze, you have Scythe, you have Greensy, you have Electric Sheep, and they're all solving somewhat different problems, which we can get into. And that market is moving fairly fast because there's a lot of money behind it.
Within commercial, each brand is solving a different problem, or they're all solving a different problem than residential?
So within commercial, everyone in many ways are solving a different problem within commercial. Okay. There is some overlap in, say, trying to provide an autonomous mower that you can also ride on. But, for instance, Graze is low-profile, solar, airport-driven units. Greensy is adding their software and hardware to existing incumbents mowers. Mm-hmm. So they've captured your Skag mowers, your Wright mowers. And then you have Scythe, who's building it from the ground up, doing their own manufacturing in Colorado. built for landscapers.
And Graze, didn't you guys build from the ground up?
Yeah, so Graze is a fully built $25 million investment in R&D. It was built from the ground up so that we could do low profile. So when I say low profile, your typical mower is, a couple feet off the ground.
Yeah.
You ride on it. For our use case, particularly in solar, it's too high. Same thing with airports. And so we built low profile. We also built it with a detachable deck. So the idea is you can take the core autonomous tractor and you can add on, say, a street sweeper or a golf ball picker. You could do a fertilization attachment so that your core user has other use cases for the core tractor other than just mowing.
I've seen that out at properties with you, and that's a really cool innovation.
Yeah, they've done the R&D team's done an amazing job on it, and it's just now getting into production, so we're finally seeing some scale.
Real quick before we jump back to what the lay of the land looks like, on a product like yours, what I know you guys are doing airports, you're doing solar. Are they truly fully autonomous? Meaning, do you need a technician or anyone watching the equipment, or can you let it do its own thing? Because I know some of the other brands, they need somebody in line of sight or in the area, correct?
Yeah, so regulation today, if you're in a public area, so, a university, park, you need to have someone in line of sight with an emergency stop button. Yeah. We operate in secured environments, especially in solar. So solar, we self-deploy, self-dock, self-charge, and deploy without human interference. And we have a remote monitoring center that's viewing everything that's going on, if there's some sort of optical detection. Mm-hmm. And then we actually can teleoperate into the machine, and we can see what's going on and clear incidents. If you go to the other side at airports, if we're on an active runway, we have to have someone monitoring those users live. So it really depends on the particular use case. Long term, most of these systems are moving towards fully autonomous, no human interaction. And really, to get to the efficiency where robotics makes sense at scale, it has to be the unit and its return to base, so how often does it return home, has to be over 90%. And that statistics in every robotic company is the key statistics that you're monitoring. If you're returning back to home successfully, over 90% of the time, it's considered a win. Your average robotic company is probably in the 60 to 70% if they're doing good. It's hard to get it up to that 90%.
And when you say returning home, you're talking about returning back to its base without human intervention in
completing
any way.
Its mission.
So nothing went wrong, everything.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's completed its day's work, it's back on its charging station,
Yeah.
and it can go back out on its own.
You'd mentioned that if you're in a public environment, somebody has to be there with called a stop button. Right. Is this determined by the size of the equipment? Or actually, let's define, on somebody's private property mowing their home, I guess that's not public?
Correct.
But aren't there still laws if you were to put or maybe it's just liability risk that people don't want to incur. If you put a piece of equipment on there with the normal robotic equipment with the normal blade, like you'd run on a 21-inch or a ride-on,
right?
Are there laws around that not being autonomous?
Yeah.
What's the regulation right now?
Yeah, so the regulation is in some ways still being defined. So autonomous vehicles, for instance, have level 1 through 5 autonomy. And you have to be within level 4 or 5 in order for it to be without a driver. Off-road robotics, which is the category we're in, it has a similar standard of the level of autonomy that you need to have. So for instance, you need to have not only LiDAR, but you need to have vision so that if the LiDAR doesn't see the object, the vision can take
Is
over.
LiDAR like thermal imaging?
Yeah.
Or how would you define it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the challenge, though, is that there's not a ton of guidance. And so you have a lot of companies pushing the limits a little bit with this type of technology. The general rule of thumb is you should be at a level 4 or 5 autonomy, which is similar to an electric vehicle that's fully autonomous. And there are standards. The Outdoor Power Equipment Institute, OPEI, has their own safety center. And most of the large robotic companies are participating in this, and we're all agreeing to the same standard before deployment. And so what we're then pushing for is that the large enterprise customers, even your Brightviews of the world, that they will only allow vendors who meet that standard to be out there.
Okay.
On the small scale units, your smaller Husqvarna and those are regulated by a product rule that came out of Europe. And that mostly has to do with how you access the blades, the power of the blades. That's why those units can't get more powerful than they already are.
And so are you saying we essentially modeled the legislation or the rules in Europe and brought them here? Okay.
Yes.
All right. As a guidepost.
Yep.
Yeah. On the commercial side, have there been any significant issues, or how has safety been in general?
So no known real safety issues. What we've seen, so let me caveat that by saying no one's been hurt.
Okay.
There have been safety glitches in the technology that could have hurt someone. I'll give a unique example that's not 100% from our space, but an industrial cleaning robot that does one of the airports that we work with. So this is a industrial scrubbing robot that cleans the floors. Can see stairs, right? It can see it drop off. What it couldn't see is that an escalator is moving like this.
Oh.
And so that machine went right off the escalator, and the person just moved in time to get off the escalator, right? But it came tumbling down. Probably could have been catastrophic.
Wow.
We see those type of incidents both in indoor environments and outdoor environments. So I'll give another example where, we had a unit that ran out of memory. And when it ran out of memory, this was just a glitch in the system. It just kept going, right? There was nothing to tell it to stop, so it blasted through a fence.
Wow.
So in the learnings, this is why these R&D stages, this is why people are on site, in these early phases. But no one's been hurt. In our case, at Graze, we require a technician on site, but we also only operate in confined environments.
Okay.
In my personal opinion, these 1,000-pound automated, 60-inch zero turns should not be operating in public spaces without human oversight. You wouldn't want your kid playing in the park,
right?
And this mower, 10 feet away, and kids running up into it. I mean, it's just, you're asking for a level of issue.
Yeah. May switch gears real quick.
Sure.
Still on state of the industry. Describe what a residential type mower looks like. And I'll bet a lot of people have seen them on YouTube. Most people probably know, but there's definitely a lot of difference. So maybe just give a little description.
So you have, in residential, you have your top brand being kind of Husqvarna. Secondary to Husqvarna in terms of quality is probably Toro or Crest. There's Nexmo. The differences aren't huge. If you wanted a unit for your residential property, it's going to depend on if you have a quarter of an acre, if you have a half acre, or if you have an acre plus. If you're in an acre plus, you're going to be Husqvarna or Crest, one of the larger units, so maybe a Ciora unit. If you have a quarter of an acre, Works by Positech, a smaller unit, maybe even some of the Segway units that have come out would be good for those smaller properties. And your price point on those is maybe $1,500. As you go up to an acre property, you might be getting closer to the $10,000 mark, depending on how large of a unit.
How many acres? Because from my experience, an acre, you could put a $4,000 unit or $3,500 unit, right? Is that still accurate?
It is. So,
but what would take you all the way up to 10? Are we talking now acreage?
Yeah, 10 to 15 acres.
Okay.
So Ciora is one of the more expensive units on the market. It's fully wireless. Husqvarna produces it.
The Husqvarna came out not like a couple years ago?
Yeah, fairly recent. Probably the best product on the market for that niche space. And then you have the EPOS units, which are wireless units, can go up to kind of 3 acres. And that's
kind of a $5,000 product?
Yep. And then you've got your wired units, all-wheel drive, maybe $2,000 to $3,000.
Yep.
My take as a whole on all of the different units that are out is, one, you do not want anything wired anymore. This model is almost gone. No one's really producing or innovating in the wired category anymore. There's just too much wireless technology that's come out. The cost of install on a wired property is typically $750 and above. And it just doesn't make sense anymore. There is a caveat to that if you are in a heavily wooded area and the unit can't get sky visibility. Some of the mowers can struggle with that.
Yeah.
But overall, you want to go wireless. You also want to go striping now. So you still have wireless units that do kind of the old Roomba style before Roomba started striping,
Yep.
and it just kind of bounces off.
Which is what I've still got.
Right. And the reality now is, for a similar cost, you can get a striping unit and wireless and some other bells and whistles, right? And so I would highly suggest one of the kind of 5 wireless units. And I tell landscapers this all the time, before you even consider thinking about deploying robots in customers' properties or even in commercial properties, put it on your home. And don't let someone take care of it. You go take care of it, because what you see is what your technicians are going to see and what the homeowner sees.
Yeah.
And so definitely play around with that model.
This is a little random, but having had a robot for so long, when you move to a striping environment, I assume that drastically brings down the runtime? Would that be accurate?
Yeah, the efficiencies.
So do you feel it also really extends longevity of the equipment?
Well, it does that, or it increases your capacity. So
Yeah, true.
you could see when we switched 550 regular units to striping E-post units, you got something like an extra 2 acres.
Yeah. Now, from my talking to other people, I'm not seeing a lot of striping units actually deployed. Is this so new, or am I just missing it? There are really a tremendous number of the striping wireless units now deployed. I feel like it's still a lot of the old model.
Yeah, so because you had 10 years of the old models, you're still seeing those. My suggestion to folks is don't invest in those unless you're getting an incredible deal, because so much of the R&D effort is being put into the new units. And what's going to happen with these kind of legacy units is the support for them is going to slowly drop off, and you're going to call in and few people even know how to support them. I will say, in residential, when you get into the E-post being the wireless units, and the striping, which they come together now, you do get into a higher price point than probably your average homeowner would spend on a unit. So you went from maybe a unit that would cost $2,000 to a unit that costs $4,000 or $5,000.
Okay.
So you might not be seeing high adoption in residential yet, because it's still
pricey,
costly.
Yeah.
Most commercial environments that are deploying autonomous units are utilizing the wireless and the striping. Especially, I'm seeing it in golf, sports turf, a lot of municipality work, universities. I mean, those areas, it's really dominating.
Okay. Staying on residential, isn't it next gen that allows you to swap the batteries? Or am I mixing them? Is it next gen, or am I mixing up my brands? There's a group out of Asia. Nexmo.
Yeah.
Are they the ones that allow you to swap the battery and you can put multiple on the same property?
Right. Nexmo, really cool product. It's meant to be a drop, mow, and go model. So everything I've talked about up until this point has been, it lives at the property, it docks itself. Nexmo was designed to come out and you deploy 2, 3, 4 of these units. They have the swappable batteries, and those units stripe perfectly. They're wireless. It's a heavier industrial mower. So while it's not, large scale commercial mower, it's probably 36 inches wide, maybe 30 inches wide, and it's got a much better cutting deck on it. So real blades, not the little razor blades that are on most mowers. That unit's great, especially if you like a drop, mow, and go model.
And that's what I think most people that are dreaming of this in the landscape industry, they want that. That's the dream. On the next gen, Nexmo.
Yeah.
I don't know where next gen's coming from. I forgot that it had a real blade on. I think I saw those. Weren't they out here and they demoed in McKinney?
Yeah, McKinney. Yeah.
So I met them at that event, and I didn't realize it had a full blade on it. That's fantastic.
Yep.
How quick? We'll just use Texas you live here now. Yeah. You know how fast the grass can grow in the springtime. Can you drop that mower or a series of those mowers once a week and get a great cut? Like if you had your lawn crew show up and knock it out with a 21-inch Toro? Or do you? Is it more of a you need to drop twice a week kind of concept?
Twice a week. And the issue really is on a typical push mower or zero turn, the suction that can create and the power that those blades have
and the
is
mulching
still and so you'd have so much left on the property. There is a model with those where they will mow the property twice or 3 times at the same time though. So the unit can basically make 3 passes on each stripe while it's out there. So that is one way to kind of overcompensate for it.
How's that work?
I don't find that the grass is maintained enough for a homeowner.
Okay.
You're not going to get you walk around the neighborhood here, you know how homeowners like their grass.
Yeah.
It's not going to cut to that level.
Okay.
On a commercial property, you might be able to get away with it. I mean, there's different standards. I would say a next mow would need to go out twice a week during the growing season, and maybe you could get to once a week when the grass becomes dormant. But that's a tough model. The other thing that's to be noted on a drop mow and go model is that you're still dealing with every property being different. Mm-hmm. So you're not just going to a property and it's a perfect square, you drop it and it just mows. Yeah. Sally's property has a side yard with 3 different beds, backyard that's different, it's got a little pond. And so where I worry with residential landscapers deploying successfully is, how much time are you spending just getting the unit to work? And could have you just mowed it yourself at the same time?
That's my
this
challenge.
Turf. Yeah.
Yeah, when I run the data, that's my struggle. I'll give you an example, and this is going to be different. For those listening, it'll be different in their market, but we know, our market, we have alleys. And we've got the little strip of grass behind the fence, and then we've got a driveway, and then we've got a strip down the side.
Yep.
Would the next mow cross over the driveway automatically, or do you pick it up and move it to get each little section?
See, that's the thing. It can, and with a leave behind robot, you take the time to program all that out.
Yeah.
And it's doing it every week, and so you make some optimizations. The problem with bringing a next mow is you can save the programming, but you're not really finessing it, time and time again. The reason a leave behind unit ends up becoming well tuned is because over, say, a 6-month period, you've seen every possible obstacle it can get to in the yard, every pothole, every area where the wire's getting chopped. And you make those modifications, and then eventually the unit runs properly until you get your irrigation replaced and rip up all the lines. So
that's my challenge right now.
So those drop mow and go models. In fact, there's a company called Electric Sheep that took the.
But they're running commercial, the big stuff.
No, so they're now doing.
I didn't know
push
about
mower
this.
size. So think about a gas-powered push mower,
like a 21-inch deck Toro type set,
yes,
or a Honda. Okay,
and they've taken those and added autonomy on top of it. So you pull out of your truck 3 push mower Toros, has autonomy on it. You start them up, and they just start zipping around. They use vision. And that model seems to be gaining more legs than the units that aren't as powerful as those. And the guy or girl who's trimming and blowing and edging is in sight to those. And those have enough power to do the lawn. It can mulch it. It's probably what your guys are using today.
They are.
And it's funny, they just
on small properties,
fold down the handle on those, add the tech, and then if you want to manually mow, you just pull back up the handle and you run it normally. It's kind of a unique idea for drop mow and go in the residential space.
In that model, I'm picturing that the guy doing the edging and weed eating and blowing is probably too distracted to be paying attention to the mower. So do you still have a second person on the property watching 3 mowers do their thing?
They don't.
Okay.
Maybe you're right. But what I've seen is it's a 1-person crew. Operator comes out, puts it on the property, then starts edging and trimming. If you look at a typical North Texas property, you definitely your eyes would be on the machines until you went to the backyard.
Yeah, so you can get there pretty fast from a edging and weeding standpoint, at least in our market here with the smaller properties.
Right. So I think you're ultimately going to have some level of safety concerns. So
yeah. Okay, that's interesting. That's something I did not know that they were now doing.
Yeah, okay. we'll have to play a video of it because
that'd be great.
It looks it's very cool. You can tell that it's a unit from Home Depot.
Yeah.
That they went and they put a vision stack on top of, and they GPS RTK, and basically you drive the thing around the property once, and you hit go, and it goes. So, and that's a big differentiator as well. There's 2 ways you map properties across all of the folks in the market. You either are mapping out the property on a tablet or on the machine, utilizing Google Images, Google Maps, and you're creating an exact algorithm for it. Or there's teach and repeat. And the market's kind of split 50-50 between which one. Teach and repeat. Every time you go to the property, you drive around the area you want it to mow, it creates a map, you start and you go. Mm-hmm. The benefit of that is every time you're at the property, if there's an area you want to avoid, you just avoid that area. Yep. The teach and repeat memorizes it. So it's there's pros and cons of both.
Okay. So residential, would you say that right now the model that's most successful for residential is the leave it behind, stay at the property all the time and do the work, or have any of these other models overtaken that model in terms of success? And maybe that simply comes down to size of property, but how do you think about that?
Let me talk about it in terms of profitability if you're starting a new business, because there's a caveat here. The most successful deployments are those that live at the property. The install's done correctly. All of the obstacles have been cleared. The homeowner knows how to get it unstuck. Mm-hmm. The more profitable model is this drop mow and go. The margins, it makes sense. You're utilizing one asset across 10 properties versus one asset being on one property and living there. And so long term, I would argue that for a landscaping service company, the best margin is going to come from having some semi-autonomous aspects of mowing where it works and tackling some percent of the mowing utilizing semi-autonomous or fully autonomous equipment. There is a model for selling homeowners on a system that lives on site, charging a monthly fee. You go out, you maintain it, you winterize it, you do all the services, and you're probably still doing the trimming and edging and fertilization and so forth. What I've seen, and I did a program for Weedman under their TurfBot platform, and I think it was 8 franchises deployed this exact model to existing residential customers who were already buying from the fertilization division. The problem is the amount of service calls that a homeowner will call you out for, and I'll make fun of you for this because Jonathan, when Robin was operating, was one of our customers, and you, like any homeowner, if it breaks, you're paying a service, right? So you send a text and you say, hey, come out and fix it. And this is what happened at Weedman, right? The service call volume was tenfold what their fertilization service calls were. And so it wasn't the same person. The thought process was we already have people at the property, say once a month. So we could always check on the unit, tweak things. We have people in the area. Well, they didn't know that there was going to be 3-4 service visits. And the reason it's so many service visits is, in the case of the wired units, wire breaks are huge.
Yes, I've got a whole list of what the issues were because I usually dealt with most of them. And even when I called you guys, that's like a tenth of it.
Yeah.
But wire breaks were one of the big ones for me. Yeah.
It's huge. The other thing is someone's run over the mower because it had to cross the driveway and it got stuck underneath the tire.
Yeah. So you've seen a bit of that.
Yeah.
I remember EJ had that one.
Ran right over it.
Yeah.
It's very common. And typically the mower gets stuck behind a tire and you don't know, you go in and back right over it. So I caveat all of that by saying there's a model that can work. I haven't seen it work yet in residential from a profitability standpoint. There's a local company in the DFW Metroplex, Smart Dots, and they've made a model of selling these units under a subscription model, servicing them, and basically they've just had to go really high in price. And so homeowners are buying them for the tech, for the noise issue, and they're willing to spend, don't quote me on this, but 2-3x what they would spend on a city turf service. So I think right now for the model to work, instead of charging $100 a month, it has to be $300 a month. Yeah. It's tough. If you're in a super affluent area, I could see being able to get the prices high enough where your concierge service for the tech, just like the concierge service that comes and gets your TV screens working and your surround sound, I could see there being a market for it long term.
My theory is also the affluent market. You've got to price it up. I mean, heck, I own a outdoor services company and my place gets mowed for free and I still run the robot because I like it so much. It's kind of an example of where the homeowner will, if they just want the tech, if they want the cool factor, the lack of noise, as you said, they'll pay up for it if the money doesn't matter. And so there's a cool factor. Problem is can you build a big enough business around that to justify even being in that business versus being in a different business?
Right.
And that's...
And the asset cost is high. So the other piece is if you really want to make the margin off of these units, then you really want to offer it as a service. And that's where the best margin is. In order to offer it as a service, then you carry the debt as the company.
Yep.
It's very easy to get a homeowner financed. There's 3 or 4 companies that finance homeowners for these mowers. Most homeowners get 0%. It's an easy sell. But the money you make off of selling a homeowner a unit is just frankly not worth your time. I mean, you'll make a couple $100 in margin and you'll set it up and you'll still get all these service calls.
Yeah. So far, the only model that I can get my head around in residential, we'll shift to commercial in a minute because there's a bunch of working models there. But the only working model I can get my head around, the challenge with it is this debt problem. But the model is you only go after large residential properties, kind of my kind of property and bigger. And you own the equipment. You price it at the same price you would have priced or more, probably more. And you still show up every Friday and mow the lawn. And so basically you're still showing up regardless, and you have to build enough slack into your route to adjust for some percentage of properties when you show up. It's like, we still got to pull the mower out of the truck and mow this one because it wasn't mowed perfectly. And it's not even a perfect model, but let's just say that was a working model. The challenge there is if I have to buy 1,000 mowers, that's a lot of debt. And would a company be able to get financed for that? So maybe let's break this into a couple questions. Would a company be able to get financed for 1,000 of these pieces of equipment if they wanted to?
Yeah, it's a great question. The simple answer is obviously it depends on the size of the company. Yeah. So as a starting point, I would argue 1,000 units, 10, 20 million size company and above. Even with that, what the finance companies are going to want to see is a contract with the homeowner that matches the contract that they're leasing the unit. So we did some of this at Robin, and if a company wanted to deploy 100 units, the finance company would say, okay, company's credit's good, personal history's good, probably have to personally guarantee them, and we want to see the customer contracts. And we want to see that you pulled credit on your customer because you're financing your customer. And
it's complicated.
So your customer is financing a unit just like you would a cell phone. And Verizon does a credit check when you sign up for a subscription cell phone. But you'd have to build the system to kind of seamlessly run your customer through your subscription service plan, get a commitment of 3 years, show that customer is credit worthy, and that helps offset the risk of not all of the debt being solely based on the balance sheet of the landscaper.
Yeah.
Because if it's solely based on the balance sheet of the landscaper, the ratios are going to go against the net income, and these ratios just don't make sense when you get to these type of scales. There are new financing companies now. It's an interesting model, and I won't get too into the weeds on this, but they buy the unit for you, the company. So they own the hardware. They lease it to you, and then you release it to your customer.
In that scenario, you have to lease it to the customer, or could you just lease it from them and you deploy it yourself at will?
Oh, you could do that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So the disadvantage there is this company owns the hardware and is just leasing it to you. Easier to get it financed. Less margin, but still good margin. And they typically, in today's market, it's 9 to 12% interest on a 36-month lease in that. At the end of that 36-month lease, you can either extend for another 2 years at a discount, or you can buy the unit out at a predetermined price. So typically like 40% of the original unit cost. So there are options. And I think so many people see the opportunity in robots as a service that more and more financing companies are coming up, but I wouldn't expect to be able to go significantly beyond your balance sheet up front. I would rely on the balance sheet up front, and then as you've deployed them, the bankers will get more comfortable.
So how are the major brands selling robotics thinking about this? Because my if I could make the entire business model work financially, COGS are right, gross margin, everything looks good. I personally get stuck on millions and millions, $10 million in debt, the equivalent of all this debt it would take for me to build it big enough to be an interesting business to me. And I know maybe that's, a lot of people are like, okay, well, I'm not trying to build something that big, but for it to be interesting to me, I'm going to have massive amounts of debt. Or it's all relative though. If you're a smaller company and you're doing $400,000 a year,
Yep.
Taking on $100,000 in debt for robots is scary. So from the perspective of the manufacturers, how are they thinking about solving this problem? Because how do you ever grow the industry until this problem is resolved?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from the manufacturers, and I know the manufacturers sometimes do well here, so I'll be, manufacturers really like to be direct to consumer. So one of the problems in this space is you're going to be competing with the manufacturer in some cases, who is also trying to push units direct to these prime homeowners and build a dealership or an installation network to help the homeowner install it and get it set up and so forth. And so you have a little bit of that. The manufacturers really haven't come up with any core programs to help landscapers and service-based companies deploy these by utilizing their own internal financing and so forth. It's really been reliant on these third-party companies. There are a couple new programs like the one I mentioned where these companies are buying and releasing them out. And there's even a program where they will month to month lease it out to you. And the reason for that is so that it doesn't hit your balance sheet as a liability.
Okay.
So there are programs now where they are working with landscapers to say, okay, we'll lease you 100 of these. It's month to month. If you decide you don't want it, you can return it. There's a penalty per one. But what it does is it doesn't put such a liability on your balance sheet that you can't get other debt.
Yeah.
Because the worry I have in talking with the landscaper is if I put $3 million of debt on who's going to give you a credit line?
Right. You got to buy trucks and you got to buy normal mowers for the rest of your business.
So it's asset heavy. And that's why the drop mow and go systems, where you're making an investment in a unit that you're utilizing across 50 properties, whatever the number is, tends to make more sense.
Yeah.
And I think the semi-autonomous stand-on mowers was where I would start, especially in commercial. Residential, depending on the size of the lawn, you can get down to the 36-inch stand-on mowers. Those now have the capability to be semi-autonomous. I mean, you get to a property and you want to just trim the border and let it mow autonomously, great. But when you don't, it operates just like your normal Scag or Wright mower. That, to me, seems like the least risky entry point into semi-autonomy. And then, as you said, these large-scale properties. So there's a company, a lot of folks will probably know them. Of course, when I want to think of it, I'll think of it in a minute.
What market are they in?
Land Creations.
Okay.
Pam Dooley's company.
Okay.
Anyways, Pam has created this model in a very high-end market just outside of Atlanta where they handle everything on your property outside. So, your bushes, your lawn, your pavement, everything. And they started requiring their customers to use Husqvarna automowers. Okay. Average home is 5 to 10 million. Beautiful properties. They wanted it to be all electric, and they use all electric for everything else. They wanted it to be leave behind, and they charge for it. Mm-hmm. And it's worked wonders because in these communities, neighbors talk to each other, and her average deployment is 5+ units per property. Wow. So,
and does she own the equipment, or do they buy it?
Yeah.
She owns it.
And Plants Creative is the name.
Okay.
They've been around for 50 years, sizable company. So at least the model up front was they own the equipment. But there's other models that could work.
That's the only model I've personally been able to get my head around that is interesting to me. And that's, but it's not a model that will deploy widespread across the United States. It's got to be very, very targeted to very specific types of buyers that can afford it and really aren't very price sensitive whatsoever. That's my theory on it. and just want the cool factor, the convenience, the lack of noise, things of that sort. I mean, I just find it cool that when we entertain and you've got this little mower out there mowing in the dark with its little light on, everybody thinks that's cool. It's just, there's a cool factor, and I think people will pay for that, but it's a big check for most people.
Yeah, it is. And I would say, depending on the market, it's homes that are multi-million-dollar homes. And ideally, in some of these markets, so there's a company in New Jersey who's successfully done this as well, but is focused on these estates. And it just worked wonders. They have 5-acre estates, they want to quiet. And I think to some degree, you charge what you need to charge to make the financing work. So if you need, for your risk tolerance for the unit to be paid off in the first year, you have to charge enough in the first year that it's paid off, and the next 2 years are all profit. And if the model doesn't work that way, then it doesn't work for the business.
Yeah. So that's a little about what's working in residential. Let's talk commercial. So what's working right now? Where are people winning? Where are they finding the model to work for them?
Yeah, commercial as a whole obviously has tons of opportunities. Contract values are higher, the amount of land being mowed is higher, so there's a lot of use cases that work. Scythe, Greensy, Graze, Electric Sheep a little bit more in the residential space, Toro, and coming up John Deere and actually Honda have it. So you call it 7 players have an option for commercial landscapers. And a majority of them work. Like I've seen the tech over the last 5+ years, it works. The model I still think makes the most sense for the average landscaper is a semi-autonomous unit, a unit that you can both ride on and use autonomously. And it's funny because as the CEO of Graze, that's not our model. So I would tell you our model is one of the few that's driven at just leave behind, but we don't take on properties that are under 150 acres. And our average solar site is closer to 5,000 acres. And so we're deploying many of these living on site all across. When we do airports, it's all living on site, and it's across DFW Airport, 14,000 acres. So we're living in a not the normal space for the regular market. The other option, if it's not utilizing a mower you bring to the property, drop, mow, go, bring to the next property, then I would say it's the leave behind units that are larger. So a Ciora unit, which can do 15 acres or so, unbelievable for sports, college campuses, municipalities. It stripes, it looks better than a traditional mower. Its accuracy is over 90% return to base. Obviously all electric. Those are winning. Like the deployment rates are incredible. I'm seeing more and more deployments. I've seen a lot of golf deployments recently with those units. So I'm really optimistic in the commercial space. And this always made sense that you would start with commercial. Figure out the easy problem first. For some reason, everyone started with the hardest problem first, and now is realizing commercial is a little bit easier. And so those are the areas where I really think you can make a dent. Even Nexmo, as we talked about, great product for commercial striping. You can do multiple at once. The big problem everyone has to get over, if it's not a leave behind unit, is how do you keep the units charged? So, and this goes for electric equipment as well. Most of these units don't have an 8-hour runtime. So you have to recharge the battery at some point during the day if you're going to mow a total of 8 hours in a day. You can utilize some of the car charging stations.
Really?
So, like ChargePoint, for instance, you can go there and you can utilize the ChargePoint to charge a lot of these systems. So at your lunch break, charge them up. A lot of them are starting to be built with swappable batteries, so you can have batteries on site. And then the third option, which I think is the most sustainable, is you have a fully retrofitted trailer that carries enough battery power to recharge the units throughout the day. And then when you get back to your shop, you recharge the trailer.
I felt like I've seen, is it Crest that has a unit now? Is Crest the red brand?
Yeah.
Okay. I felt like I was at a show or something and they were demoing a big
So there's 2.
unit that would...
Crest and Greenworks.
Okay.
Both have...
I thought it was Crest that I was looking at, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Inside the trailer, you've got a screen telling you every battery life.
Yeah.
You've got probably a 40 kilowatt battery in the trailer that's fully charged that can charge everything else up all day. It does require, depending on how sophisticated your shop is, when you're switching to these units, let's say you want to deploy 20 of them, you're likely going to be making some major modifications to your electrical work at the shop. We've seen, tens of thousands of dollars worth of work.
I am very aware of these challenges.
Yeah. There's a big uplift there.
Yes, and that's not just robotics. That's going into everything battery right there. So, cool. So tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in commercial in terms of what's working outside of Graze. What's the property type that tends to be working best? Do we, because you talked about multi-acre, we're clear on that. Do we care about a bunch of trees in a multi-acre environment? As for example, in residential, if the homes are close together, even if they don't have a lot of trees, we can run into GPS problems when they're right between the home and they get confused.
Yep.
Even in a striping situation, from my experience. But do we have any of that in commercial? Because on these bigger properties, what are the problems? Maybe that's a better way to ask the question. What breaks the model in commercial? What are those characteristics? Like, okay, this is how you profile property to say it's going to work or it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's a great question. The trees and those type of barriers can be problematic, although most of the units today have obstacle detection and avoidance. And so you're seeing, if a commercial mower comes up to a picnic table, it's going to stop. It's going to go around, and it's going to keep going, and it'll build it into its path. And so that's come a long way over the last couple of years. Prior, a lot of times it would just stop, less of an issue. Where you have issue is if you have significant tree coverage so that the signals are bad.
So it's mowing under the tree coverage.
Right. Yeah. Even if you are in say an industrial parkway where there's grass and it's surrounded by buildings, like a courtyard almost. You have to, before you deploy any of these, you have to check the coverage, because if you go the wireless route and it has coverage gaps, and again, a lot of the systems out there are getting better and better, but that's going to be a barrier. The biggest barriers, though, are actually the quality of the land. So it really is, does it flood? How rough is the terrain? Units getting stuck is probably the number one issue outside of wire breaks, which as wires go away. It's going to be units stuck because it landed in this little gopher hole. Yeah. And is there high slopes? There's very few units that are autonomous that can handle over 15 degrees. Because
they slide, don't they? Isn't
right.
that what happens?
Yep. And water's a big deal.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want you to mow the dams. And so the ideal properties that I always say, if you're going to start anywhere, warehouses, data centers, these large mixed-use properties that tend to have a lot of grass. Obviously, there's tons of work in the government municipality space, but it really is large, flat land, I have to say, for where the technology is today.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the details from a business standpoint, such as maintenance. What's maintenance look like? Maybe let's do residential and commercial. What's maintenance on this equipment look like?
Yeah, so two different sets of equipment. Residential equipment, this, Husqvarna style unit that's mostly plastic. It's all swappable parts. You can fix anything on a Husqvarna unit in generally 30 minutes. Your drive motors go bad, your front board, sometimes your wheels, and then you have to change your blades a couple times a year. None of that's any real maintenance. Yeah. Most of your reoccurring maintenance, clean the units, winterize them, change the blades, and then do your software updates. Super simple. Go over to the commercial side. It's like maintaining a typical zero turn.
Okay.
There are only a few gas-powered autonomous zero turns in the market. Those are just like maintaining a gas-powered zero turn, and the engine still has as many problems as it had before.
Yeah.
And then you're also maintaining the tech stack. So you could have damage to your LiDAR system, you could have a broken camera, you could have wheel issues. There's a lot of communication because it's now semi-autonomous between the core components on the system and the tech. So that communication, the wiring harnesses, those are the type of issues you'd see. And that's why I would always suggest that you buy initially under a service plan that includes all of that, especially when it's a new product. Some of the things I've seen that you really need to maintain on those units is definitely your blade systems, which most people should be familiar with. Mm-hmm. On the electric equipment, you have to be very conscious of not overloading the battery. So there's the 80-20 rule. You really don't want to charge a battery beyond 80%, just like in a Tesla.
So it's something that the owner of the equipment needs to think about. They don't self-regulate.
Correct.
Well,
yeah, because
that's a bit of challenge, isn't it? Charging overnight then? Like
so you can set it on the machine, so
okay.
only charge. And by default, they're all set to that. But typically, if you want, and the same thing for a Tesla, if you want to go on a little longer road trip, you can up it.
You want to max your efficiency while you're out in the field, I see. And then you get yourself in trouble, you're saying.
Because they'll do it every time.
I'm with you.
And the other thing that I'll mention about all electric equipment, and this falls into the semi-autonomous category, is your resale value on these pieces of equipment is not the same as a standard zero turn. It doesn't have a flip market to it, just like Teslas don't really have a flip market to it. You will lose money at the time that at the end of the equipment's life. So if it gets to 5 years, which it should get to 5 years, most manufacturers are trying to push for 7. Say it gets to 5 years, there's not much to do with that piece of equipment. The battery is what's going to go first, and to replace the battery is probably half the cost of the machine. So you really have to think about that in your financial model.
Is that true even as you move up into these large $20,000 pieces of commercial equipment, still $10,000 for a battery?
Right.
Okay.
Lithium-ion batteries is the sole cost. So your highest...
You're getting into car batteries territory.
Yeah, I mean, in in our unit, we have a car battery. It's made by BYD. And it's a 40 kilowatt battery, weighs 700 pounds. So you're getting into, light auto. So think of what they're putting on golf carts and four-wheelers and those type of applications. And so when you're doing the financial modeling, it's a little different than your typical zero turn. You're not going to run it as long. You're not going to flip it probably. And so if you're on, I know a lot of landscapers are on a 3-year flip, and they know they can get, say, 40% out of what they originally paid. That's probably going to change a little bit in this. The ROI, though, because of the labor savings, should offset all of that, but just something to be cognizant of. And then the last thing I'll mention in terms of maintenance is, depending on where you're at in the country, sparks from these mowers, which happens on gas mowers as well, it's becoming more and more of a fire hazard when it gets dry out. And electric mowers can have the same issues, sometimes even more. All of our units are equipped with devices to detect fire, but then also with fire extinguishers. So
and is this a spark from the electronics, or is this a spark from a piece of a regular equipment that's been fitted with the technology?
So it could be a number of things. So on typical gas mowers, you can see a spark on a number of things.
So non-gas, I should have put it that way.
Yeah, on the non-gas units, you can see a spark from a number of the different connections if they're not done properly. In cases where things get extremely overheated, you can see that. And so it's just something that people have to be really cognizant of, especially if you're in California or somewhere where there's dry spouts. It's been an issue. Fire detection on these is critical.
Okay.
Most manufacturers are putting fire detection, which would alert not only you as the user, but a number of other folks, including the fire department.
Okay.
Sort of stop it quickly.
So you've heard about and seen incidences.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's alarming the number of wildfires that are started from lawn equipment.
Really?
Yeah.
Not stuff I've had to think about, so I didn't know that.
Texas isn't have as large of an issue with that, but it's becoming a larger and larger issue that people are trying to educate on.
What's insurance look like?
So, insurance is tricky. There's, on the residential side, so the small units, you're best self-insuring. What I mean by that is, what we did when I was with Robin is we created an insurance fund. Basically, every unit we charged an extra $10 for. That $10 went into an insurance fund, because what you're really insuring against is theft. And if you do the math, if you put 10% of every unit into an insurance fund of yourself, it's going to cost you less than going through the insurance companies.
Okay.
And based off of the rate of theft that we've seen across thousands of these units, you've covered yourself.
Okay.
We found that to be the easiest. Liability insurance, standard liability insurance is normal for the residential space. Nothing major. You get into the commercial side, you actually have to insure the units. You have to have full product
To be
liability
able to
insurance.
finance them or lease them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of companies that do it. It's expensive, but similarly, you're not going to be more than 10 to 15% of the cost of the unit. That's the highest I've seen it.
So meaning there's a theft rate as high as 10% of the units.
No, I'm saying the cost of insurance overall
It
can be as high as 10 to 15% of the cost
of the
your-
asset cost.
Yeah.
Okay. Original capex.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And these are coming down. It's the problem is just understanding.
Yeah, they got to
tech.
figure out the data on this to know how to insure it.
Yeah. So it's
Okay.
just new. On the other side, on the lightweight equipment, not hard at all. The big equipment, there's delivery robots now that are running down the sidewalks. It's becoming so common that it's getting there. You just don't want to be put into the category of self-driving vehicles on main roads. So what was happening with off-road robotics is we kept getting put into the same category as autonomous vehicles, which is very different. We're not at a stoplight dealing with pedestrians. We're not driving people in our cars. You do not want to have to follow those regulations and those insurance policies.
Yeah.
And so finally, off-road robotics, which is really led by Caterpillar, who's really defined what off-road robotics means, and they've done it in the construction space mostly, that's now taking a step down and saying, okay, you guys should be held to this standard, and there'll even be a lower category as you get into confined spaces.
Okay.
So